So our 4-week series on Joseph winds up this morning under the sermon title, Surprised by Grace. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable unto you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. So do you remember? Last week, at long last, the brothers stepped into the light of truth. They had sold their brother Joseph into slavery as a young adult. Against seemingly insurmountable odds, Joseph had become the ruler of Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh through his ability to interpret dreams and handle a devastating famine. The brothers came to Egypt and encountered Joseph when petitioning for food. But while Joseph recognized them right away, the brothers remained in the dark. Joseph put them through all manner of testing until an ultra-tense moment when he could no longer hold back. Joseph drew his brothers in close and unveiled the truth of their relationship. That Joseph was the long-lost brother they had done wrong and was now in a position of power. Power over Egypt, over food supplies, indeed, over the brothers themselves. As our man in the field figured out as we left last week, even and perhaps especially with these secrets now uncovered, it was really up for grabs what would happen next. For though Joseph seemed happy enough about the reunion, now Joseph and the brothers all knew all too well the sordid backstory that brought them to this point. There was still baggage around to contend with. Today's narrative starts out optimistically enough. The brothers make a round-trip journey yet one more time between Egypt and Canaan, this time to reveal to their father that long-lost Joseph has surfaced as the great and powerful under Pharaoh, and that he vows to take care of his family. Even Pharaoh and his servants are pleased at the prospect of having all these Israelites come and dwell in Egypt. So Jacob's entire entourage, wives, offspring, livestock, and more, they all migrate. When the family arrives in the region of Goshen, Joseph comes out to meet his father, and they weep. The circle of life seems complete as Joseph and his father are reunited, and Jacob declares that he can now go in peace and gratitude whenever God calls him to die. 17 more years pass until Jacob dies, as the Israelites prosper in Goshen under Joseph's benevolent hand. Jacob receives the assurance that he will be buried in his homeland, and he bows his head on the bed and breathes his last. After 70 days of weeping, Joseph receives permission from Pharaoh to go up to Canaan. So the retinue that accompanies him is impressive as chariots and charioteers, all the servants and elders of Pharaoh, the household of Joseph, all the brothers go along. They carry Jacob's bones and bury them in the cave at the field at Machpelah, just as his ancestor Abraham had bought. At this point, the brothers are on high alert, for they recognize that the death of their father is a potential game changer. After all, in the end, the basis for their common bond with Joseph is their ancestry, and now the common ancestor is gone. What if Joseph was merely putting on a facade while Jacob was still alive? What if Joseph planned to serve up just desserts as soon as everyone returns from laying Jacob in the grave? What if the past 17 years, which quite frankly seemed too good to be true, really were? The brothers know what they deserve. punishment. The pain they inflicted on Joseph was willful and strategic. Joseph has every reason to convict them. I'm not aware of any statute of limitations on trafficking of a sibling. The brothers figure that their best shot at a lighter sentence is to admit they were wrong and play on Joseph's sympathies. So even in death, they ride their father's coattails as they seek clemency. They say to Joseph, "Our dad told you to forgive us for our bad behavior." But Joseph, the brothers discover, is on an entirely different page from them. He stands before them, not in judgment, but in a spirit of forgiveness, reconciliation. He has no need to engage in plea bargaining, for Joseph looks beyond the tyranny of the temporary, and he sees the wonder that God can wrought in all of life's circumstances. He says to his brothers, as he reflects on the whole ordeal, "Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good." In other words, Joseph surprises the brothers with grace. Were they guilty? Absolutely. They should have been convicted. But through the mercy and loving kindness offered by Joseph, the brothers are set free. The perspectives of the two parties could scarcely be more different. For the brothers, you see, they view life from below, as a system of gains and losses, negotiations and bargains, winners and losers. Joseph, on the other hand, views life from above, from the perspective of God's reconciling, steadfast love that promises life and not death, hope and not despair, blessing even amidst setbacks and pain. And this allows Joseph to take the long view, to recognize that even amidst trials and tribulations all along life's journey, the tribes of Israel, see, they had been preserved. And the promise made to Abraham to become a great nation, it had been kept. The Israelites, they were prosperous. They lived freely in Egypt. So even amidst it all, God's will was done. As far as Joseph was concerned, God's grace surrounded them. And with this overarching, God-infused perspective in view, now the story ends with the Israelites living peacefully until Joseph expires and is placed in a coffin in Egypt to be carried back to Canaan, ultimately by Moses. But that's another story from the book of Exodus. So, what can we learn from this saga of Joseph? Filled with parental favoritism and sibling rivalry, injustices, close calls, mistaken identities, hidden agendas, and ultimately resolution and reconciliation. Is it a tale that purports that some people are simply golden children and others are not? Does it explain why the mysteries of why cancer strikes or hurricanes destroy the innocent? Why some people are born to wealth and privilege and others cannot escape chronic poverty? It hardly does that. Why, in accordance with the ancient worldview, the narrative suggests that dreams dreamt in doubles are the inalterable cause of things like famine and personal greatness. So in short, the twists and turns of our individual journeys are not explained, and we're left with the perhaps sobering reality that life happens, and fairness or certainty, they're not part of the earthly equation. Nevertheless, I would suggest that Joseph, this epic, has tremendous power and meaning as a poetic expression of God and God's grace in action. For it reveals a God who remains in the midst of the ups and downs, the welcome surprises, the unspeakable tragedies, the serendipities and the calamities. A God who has a plan and a destiny for us that is larger than the present moment, and a God whose love is wider than any injustice or injury we might inflict upon each other. We discover that even when harm is intentional, as it was in the case of the brothers, God is still good, and God will always and eventually bring life and peace. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that the things we do don't matter. This man in the field, he did play a part in the advancement of Joseph's story, and the brothers did commit a treacherous act. We can make life more simple or more complex, more fair or unfair by the things we say and do. Because even though we're called to treat each other with love as God's fellow children, we have the freedom not to respond, and we have the freedom to inflict hurt. We have the capacity, at least for a while, to seek life on our own terms and place ourselves at the center of our universe. So how we live makes a difference. And yet, God's story in Joseph assures us that beyond the fragile existence that we call this life and the fleeting, unpredictable nature of human interaction, beyond all that, God acts in love with a calculus that has nothing to do with merits or demerits, good luck, or one darn thing after the other. Rather, God surprises us with overwhelming grace that can take the entirety of life and make all things new, that can reveal blessings in the ashes, and love that is stronger than hate, hope that is stronger than despair, and life that is stronger than death. God acts with overwhelming, unconditional grace and promises us life beyond what we see and meaning beyond the grave. My friend from the field, I am done.
Oh, Pastor Katie and members of the congregation. Young man, can you hold this staff for me? It was my great-grandfather's. Be careful. I thank you so much for letting me visit with you these past few weeks and for helping me learn to read and for sharing with me the story of Joseph. I am truly blessed, more than you would know. But now I know that I can make choices and that I can direct somebody, and what I do may affect someone's life. But it is God who is the ultimate author of our stories. He is a good and gracious keeper of our destinies. It's time for me now to go to another story where, once again, I may make a difference, where I may have the opportunity to love as God loves, and where I may look for God's helping hand in everything I do. Well, now wait a second. That's really not up to me. It's up to your congregation.
Please, I really want to make a difference, and I want to share God's love with everyone. I promise to come back.
Well, what do you all say? Do you want him to go?
Sure.
All right. Well, take my staff, young man, all right? And let's head out for our next story. Are you coming? Come on. Sure, the more the merrier. Have you ever heard of a man named Moses? Onward to Mount Sinai.